Terrific. Look, I look at your background and I see all those pictures. There's a lot going on back there. What are you working on?
So these are pretty much my mood boards. My team and I are working collection, be releasing in the later part of the year. And I recently had an incredible trip to Indonesia, which really informed a lot of the point of view of this new direction that we're going to be taking for this new collection of ours. And so the mood boards and the imagery in the background pretty much just represent the visual aspects of visual cues and what we essentially would like to into this new body of work of ours.
So you said a new direction. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, I think collection of after collection, we continuously look at the archives to see what we've done in the past, and we always use that as a blueprint to see how we can expand upon it. I think it really helps a lot by sticking to our signature sensibility of the Lukhanyo brand in itself. But I suppose because it's our first time really exploring Southeast Asian traditions within costume and as well as dress and attire, it brings in a new kind of sensibility to something that we haven't necessarily done before. And this also fundamentally comes down to the use of textiles and prints and use of color. So it's that is the new direction that we're essentially looking at. I think I've always been quite curious about the East. And I know that we've leaned onto aesthetics and also just aesthetics and sensibilities of Japan in our earlier collections, but we really wanted to look more within the Indonesian region and to see how we can bring in that kind of style within our label.
And was that part of the plan? That trip was very much looking for inspiration, perhaps looking for a new direction for a future collection, or more, I'm just going to go out, enjoy myself, and then in the middle of the process, you found, like inspiration.
Well, I suppose it's definitely a hybrid of both. I think inspiration and research can definitely go hand in hand with one another. And I think as I've grown as a designer, I've definitely been a lot more pragmatic about my approach. So there's always a sense of curiosity that comes from the foundation of whatever inspirations that we have on hand. But it's really trying to understand what is the provenance of this curiosity. Where does it essentially, do we have an opportunity to actually explore it by going to that region as opposed to compiling imagery from libraries and as well as from online data. So just really having the opportunity to immerse myself within the country and to visit different regions and to actually see visually and speak to the Indonesian people, it really allowed me to inform how to take the approach of this specific collection and to understand how I can bring in certain nuances from those customs into something that's contemporary and beautiful.
Is there anything specific that stand out to you that you weren't expecting when you were there?
Well, I mean, textiles has been something that's always been quite fundamental to the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand, the use of textiles, the use of color. And I really wanted to take this quite relaxed, I suppose. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say there was something completely new within the context of what we found because essentially we had done so much research prior. So I went into it really having quite a good idea as to what I could possibly expect. But from a human side of things, there's a certain kind of ease and kindness that is within the Indonesian people that I definitely appreciated and I didn't necessarily expect to experience. Coming from a country such as South Africa, where we move in such a strong sense of community, I didn't realize how strong that kind of customs is within another part of the world, which is technically on the east side, quite far from my own immediate home. So it was really beautiful to actually see just a beautiful spirit of kindness through how welcoming the people from Indonesia are like and how open they are. So just having the opportunity to engage with them on that frequency really brought the level of peace in my mind that I didn't realize I was looking for.
That's so lovely to hear. Yeah, the sense of community in other countries, it's almost a way that even though you are in a completely new land, different language, different culture, but when you realize and you see the community, it brings you back home. There's a sense of familiarity that is something that you can find anywhere in the world?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I've really had the opportunity to travel different parts of the world, and I think that's one of the many blessings that my career has afforded me. But it's not like that in every single part of the world, actually. At least the ones that I've visited, I think some operate at a different frequency, and I think a lot of it has to do with pretty much culture and customs and just the way that infrastructures are set up. So there was something quite refreshing about Indonesia, and it actually reminded me of Burkina Faso within the context people, incredibly kind, incredibly welcoming,
Hmm.
and just no pretense at all. And being in the presence of a culture like that is something that's incredibly inspiring, and it allows you to have a level of surety with who you're essentially engaging with. And yeah, it was just really refreshing. There was absolutely no pretense at all. So it's something that has really just inspired me.
How lovely. So for this next correction that you're working on, are you the inspiration is more aesthetic? Are you looking for the material as well they're going to be using? Maybe, as you mentioned before, working with some craftsmen from the region. What is of this collaboration of the inspirations coming from, and what do you see that's gonna, how it's gonna turn out when the collection is completed?
Sure, no, of course. It's definitely from an aesthetic point of view. We did want to explore textiles that would essentially be made from that region. But through our research, we found out that it is quite remote in terms of the specific regions that actually create textiles. So, from a scalability point of view, it would be quite hard to integrate that within our business because essentially, as much as I'm a designer that leans onto all sorts of inspirations. I'm also an entrepreneur, so I have to be really as to how the marriage between business and works. So we thought that it would be too premature for us right now to explore the route of development because of how remote the textile development actually takes, well, how much time it actually takes within those remote regions. So from a scalability point of view, it would be, and also the infrastructures they are completely different to the textile communities that we've had the opportunity to work with in the different parts of Africa, where infrastructure is a lot more set up, where scalability is a possibility. So we are really leaning on more of the aesthetics of Indonesian customs and to see how we can bring that kind of sense into the language of the Lukhanyo brand.
See, I find it very interesting that you mentioned about like playing the both roles. You were a designer, but also an entrepreneur. And a lot of the times, perhaps the business side can get overlooked. It's not as glamorous, it's not as exciting. It is the fashion part, the design side. But you clearly has a very comprehensive vision and understanding of your business, what's possible, what's doable. So in a way that you a fully control of your craft.
Mm.
Now, that aspect, is that something that you had it since day one when you open and you begin with the brand, or something now that you've been doing for quite some time, you kind of learn and acquire throughout the years a little bit more experience and perhaps some guidance with people surrounding?
Well, I mean, you said such an interesting point in terms of sometimes people can really neglect the business side. I think these things come in seasons. There's definitely periods where business takes over or design takes over. For the formative years of the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand, it had really focused on the point of view, the visuals, really trying to build the sensibility and the values and the aesthetics of the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand, where the business side might have not necessarily had much focus. And I think it inherently happened like that because fundamentally, I'm the one that's having to carry both roles, and I'm also a designer more than anything else. I think that's something that really comes intrinsically to me. But it's within these last 2 years where the brand actually has experienced such exponential growth, where I've had to actually take a step back from the design side of things and to really focus on the business to see how are we able to manage this independent brand of ours that's coming from Africa's most southern tip, but has a global sensibility, but also has a global presence. How do those two worlds essentially collide? And it's a difficult task because essentially within that growth that has come, it has opened up a lot of room for us to play catch up in a way that, in the most challenging way that I had never really anticipated. And so, right now, the marriage between business and design is something that is so important to me and the brand. And what I've also realized is that there's a very specific system within the fashion industry, especially within the global fashion. Um, because right now I was positioned very much in South Africa, and then we had international exposure that brought more visibility to the brand and allowed us to have international showcases, partnership, agent partnerships, and so forth. There's a very specific paradigm and rule set how the fashion system is supposed to be like, and we worked so hard to try follow that system, but we realized that coming from where we do and having the systems that we have here in South Africa, it's something that's completely different and difficult to meet the scale of if you don't necessarily have the right foundation to get there. And because we were now pretty much at a crossroad of identifying these challenges, it made it really difficult for us to keep up the way that we had essentially envisioned, because you're trying to close this gap of how do I still operate from South Africa but still have a global brand and work in accordance to these rules and systems that have been advised to us, or is essentially on the business of fashion handbook, should I say. And it's difficult. It's really
Yes.
hard. So we are in a moment of really recovery, lack of a better word, to see how we can manage a lot of the challenges that have been faced along the way, and to see how we can work in accordance to what makes sense with our brand, what makes sense with our business, how can we operate independently and really start from the ground up again to essentially have the business and brand that I had envisioned for a long, long time and for years to come, essentially.
Now that brings me to an interesting question. As you mentioned about, let's say the book of fashion, right? The blueprint for to achieve a global level of a brand. When fashion likes to talk a lot about emerging designers, sustainability, all those very exciting, sexy words. But when you're in it and you look at the blueprint, what it takes to be that global design for throughout the eyes of the business of fashion, do you think those rules of engagement, let's put it that way,
Mm-hmm.
are welcoming to brands from different parts of the world that are not in Europe or in the US? Are they even achievable for a certain level? They say, yes, come join us, but are the rules favorable that emerging or the new brand that's coming out?
Yeah, I think the two can definitely exist in one. I think it can be supportive, but I also think it can be difficult and challenging. And it really does depend on variety of different factors. I think if you're coming from fundamentally, I think being an independent brand is very difficult globally, right? But if you are coming from the Northern Hemisphere, being a place such as America or Europe, for example, and you are an independent brand, and within those two specific regions, the system of the business of fashion is already set into stone, but the support of independent brands based on the ecosystem and infrastructure of just being in a first world country is a lot more supportive because the infrastructure is fundamentally already there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if there's a body corporate of an institution such as prizes or fashion institutions that are really in support of emerging designers, they are able to guide you in a way that's based on the blueprint that's within the ecosystem and also the resources within the ecosystem. So an emerging independent brand can still have a lot more benefits from that are coming from that specific region because they from there. So inherently, the ecosystems will always be there to support them, right? So, however, if you're coming from a place such as South America or South Africa, and or any other African country that is from a completely different social economic system and infrastructure, and not necessarily first world but third world, but you're trying to be global within your offerings and within having your name part of the conversation of the fashion industry, there are a lot more challenges. So it can be quite difficult to get to the other side. But with that being said, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's impossible. I think what you fundamentally need is a really strong sense of do you want, but also understanding your positioning and being so grounded within it. Because essentially, you can get so lost within trying to reach for the stars and trying to be part of the conversation without realizing how much it essentially takes to get to that point, and how difficult it will be purely because of just the regional positioning that you are in, right? So coming out of institutions such as the different prizes and competitions that we've been a part of, that we have really benefited incredibly well. And I'm so thankful for those extraordinary opportunities and networks that have essentially been built. I have realized these are still fundamentally institutions that are positioned within first world countries, but also within a system where they inherently created the business of fashion within this global context that we essentially have, right? So, as much as the intentional work that they have created is extraordinary, it might be difficult to implement some of the advisory that they would inherently have for those that are already part of that ecosystem, and apply that advisory for someone that is coming from a completely different ecosystem, such as a country that is developing as opposed to being first world. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And then I think what you have done is an interesting thing. And let me know if I'm wrong on this. For
Mm,
being, let's say, from being from a brand from a different ecosystem that we were just talking about, South Africa or South America and Southeast Asia, but you have been able to take advantage and benefited from a lot of press in Europe, in US, and the international level. But
mm,
I think the interesting thing that you never really let go of was your roots, your community, and also your local market that will
mm,
be in your longevity in the long term. Perhaps a lot of emerging brands that get the glimpse of the international level perhaps sometimes get so in this idea that they need to capitalize in the moment and really
mm,
go all forward, and then suddenly you see yourself perhaps disengaging for what made you who you are, and
mm,
perhaps neglecting a little bit the community or the market that
mm,
built that brand for yourself, that will let you
mm,
in a business aspect as well, will give the
mm,
longevity. I think you talk about patience as well multiple times in the aspect of business that
mm,
will allow you to enjoy uh, the creative the creative freedom, but also that possibility to continue to engage in an international level with less of a pressure than
mm.
perhaps before.
Well, I think there's definitely
Go ahead.
points there that I resonate with, but there's also definitely points where I've also been at fault for, to be quite honest. It's only over these last year and a half where we've been able to really start building our consumer customer base within our country. For so long, it started in South Africa in terms of building our business and building our customer base, but the offerings that we had within our label was just so niche that it had more of an international appeal. And then since the affiliations with certain organizations and institutions, prizes and so forth, it brought international exposure to us, right? And then because that international exposure came, we did for a period completely neglect our local market, and we neglected it based on our local market wasn't able to essentially afford the offerings that we were creating. So, from a business aspect of things, we really had to lean into the market, which was the global market that was really able to fuel the capital and sales that we essentially needed in order for our business next stage, right? So while this process was happening, we were getting a lot of visibility. There was a lot of press. There was a lot of PR. We're doing Paris Fashion Week. We have beautiful editorials. We in all these beautiful magazines, and it really did feel like we had been neglecting my immediate space where I'm essentially coming from. So all of the community that we have here in South Africa were definitely endorsing and supporting the label with text of praising us and really commending us in these extraordinary achievements that we've had. However, from an offering point of view, an accessibility point of view, they didn't necessarily have the opportunity to buy Lukhanyo Mdingi because it was selling at retailers for higher price points that is just of a higher bracket to the conservative bracket that we have here within our country, right? So it was in 2022 where I paid attention to that and I really had to shift the paradigm and to see how can I change this? How can the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand essentially come back home and really build our community even more, not just through the context of a brand presence, but also creating experiences and offerings where they can actually feel the essence and spirit of who we are and feel a lot more connected. So there's a whole bigger plan that we have been to do. And this does not pertain to just the e-commerce launch and really working on price points that are a lot more feasible, but it also comes down to activation, brand partnerships that we're doing within South Africa. It's leaning onto seeing how we can work with those communities to introduce them to our community so people can get to know us a bit more. And it's having beautiful experiences. It's going into different disciplines that are not necessarily pertained to just fashion design. So there's a whole strategy that we're essentially trying to work on. And this strategy is going to be a perennial one because essentially I am South African and so many of the partners that we've worked come from where I come from. So I think it's really important to fundamentally support that ecosystem and to really be in a position of helping it grow. And that is essentially what I'm fundamental to do right now. I don't necessarily want to say that I'm shying away from the global market. It's something that we definitely still want within the business, but I feel like both can definitely still exist while we're in this period of just a re-evaluation of our brand and a new season as to how we can just really grow sustainably and be in a position where we can really support partners in the best way that we can.
It's an interesting thing that often when we talk about emerging brands or new business in general, we talk about the difficulties and the challenges, but there are a lot of challenges when you're doing well, the growing pains, right? There are so
Yeah.
many ways that you have to figure out how to maximize the opportunities given to you, the capital that is being invested, how to do that. Do you enjoy that part of the business? I mean, we're talking about that you're a designer first and foremost, but you also own the business. Do you enjoy that aspect as well?
It's been a very challenging period, actually. I think since the year of 2022, where the business had experienced such exponential growth, it became difficult for us to actually meet the scalability of that growth. That really put the business in a very compromising position, especially with third parties and partners and people that we had worked with and service providers and collaborators where we are still very much in a period of recovery. We are really trying out of the challenges that had been imposed onto us, but also business decisions that were made too prematurely or back of lack of advice or lack of even foresight. So it's such an amalgamation of different things that have essentially unfolded over these last 2 years. And as hard as it's been, it's either fundamentally have two decisions. You give up and you close your brand and
Yeah.
you move on, or you constantly day in and day out, no matter how difficult it is, you make the commitment and to use this moment of challenges as an opportunity to learn and to communicate as clearly and as possible as you can to your third parties and to also be practical and to see how can I use this period as a way to grow from this and to implement the right strategy in the most pragmatic way possible. I had no idea how long it would take for us to come through this period of recovery and to see how we can implement certain strategies, acknowledging where our positioning is at. It's been so difficult. But with that being said, I think about it this way. I've been wanting to become a fashion designer for the last 27 years. So since I was 5 years old, that is when the dream was fundamentally seeped into my brain. And from the age of 5, I've been sketching clothes ever since. And it was only within the context of 2015 where I've now established it as an actual business. But essentially, the pruning and the seeds had already been planted many years before the company became an actual company, purely because the practice of it started since I was 5 years old. So this period that it is incredibly challenging right now, it's 2 years out of 27 years. It's really not that bad in the greater scheme of things because I really understand the larger investment of what to do within this business and this dream that I have for the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand. And I really need to pay attention to because I am guided by that 5 year old who wanted to become a designer. And I'm guided by just a lot of the intentional work that we've had the opportunity to do and to implement. And I'm also guided by the partners and people that have supported us since the very beginning. And even with the shortcomings that we've had with other third parties based on a multitude of different reasons, we're still here and we're still trying. So it's really recognizing that this is a season and the season will come to an end and it will lead into something that is a lot more prosperous. And that prosperous season will also have a season and then it will also lead to more challenges. And I think that's just the inevitable yin and yang of life. But I'm really just trying to be very patient with myself, but to also be very practical as to what are the best ways to essentially move forward right now for my business, my team, and for the people that we've had the opportunity to work with.
Let's go back to the 5 year old. I'm interested. I want to get to know that little guy. What was for? Did you understand what fashion was back then, or just the idea of sketching, designing? Tell me a little bit about those days. How was the formation of this? What is that interest?
It started with 80s into 90s soapy drama called The Bold. So during the 90s, I think there was just this large culture around soapies. And specifically here in South Africa, there was just so much American media. And I was immersed in it. I mean, like television was a huge thing in our house, but there was also quite a lot of advertising within print. I definitely remember being surrounded by a multitude of magazines, and watching The Bold and the Beautiful really started the foundation of my interest in fashion. But it also led to shows such as Jam Alley and Silly Matunzi and Top Billing. These are local shows that are in South Africa that revolve around really creativity and music and design and culture. So I've always had like quite a strong connection to music and fashion, and I feel like the two have definitely beautifully within one another. But there was a very specific attraction that I had to fashion specifically, and it was just that outlet of having the ability to sketch and draw something. And I really put that into practice immediately. I did not waste any time at all. And even just thinking about it, vocalizing this out loud, it's quite interesting to really think about that 5 year old Lukhanyo who has been so committed to that dream and being in a position of respecting it and using it as a way to create really intentional work, even despite the challenges. I'm actually really impressed as to how the dream of that young boy was able to cultivate this practice of something that he's so passionate about into something that's meaningful, something that's rooted through purpose, and something that a large community of people have added their time and talent and trust as a means of service to the bigger picture that we have.
When you talk about that 5 year old, you mentioned about the surprise of the commitment that the 5 year old already had to the vision, what turned to be your label today. If you were to look back and think about that commitment that we're just referring to, is that something that you took it away from your parents, maybe by example, or a part of your personality, something you always had it with you?
I think it's a hybrid of both. I think it's recognizing that I have a gift, but I also think it's recognizing that I come from a home where the spirit of faith is something that had always been instilled into us, no matter how challenging the period can be. So I've always cultivated those two values within my mindset. And yeah, I think those were definitely the fundamentals of why things have been able to be cultivated the way that they essentially are today.
What is your favorite childhood memory?
Learning how to swim.
How did it happen? Tell us the story.
And I think about it actually quite often. And the reason why I've been thinking about it as of late is because it's a simple thing that everyone can learn to do, but it's such a liberating feeling to be able to do it. I remember I was 9 or 10 years old and I was with my best friend. His name is Del Rivet. And I mean, Del and I were like pen pals, like we were just the ultimate besties. Every single weekend I was at his house, every single weekend without fail. And his family, an extraordinary family, the kindest people that you'll ever. They're pretty much like my second family. And they had a house that was very close to the river, and they had like a whole bunch of different kayaks and canoes that led to the river. So we would walk down to their little piece of land, and they would essentially have like an amalgamation of different canoes that we would sometimes use on every Saturday morning, just so we can get like beautiful sun on our skin and just swim and have fun. And one particular morning, we went with his mom, and I didn't necessarily feel unsafe because I knew that we're going to be on the canoe, so it's not going to be an issue. I mean, I knew that I couldn't swim, but that they didn't know that knowledge at all, right? And I'm not too sure what happened, but on our way back, so we paddled to the river, the mouth where the river and the sea meet, and we got off and we had fun and we played and we swam, and then we had to paddle back. And I'm not too sure what happened, but for some specific reason, both Gerald and I had to jump off. We had to jump off. And that's when I became really terrified. And his mom was like, just jump off, obviously under the assumption that I could swim. His mom his mom just assumed, hey, you can just swim. So I jumped off because I was just too afraid to tell her that I couldn't swim. So I jumped off, and what essentially happened was I jumped off, and what essentially happened was I just held onto the canoe. And from that moment, she realized, okay, this boy cannot swim. So she said, come back on. And I was like, sure, no problem, let's do it. And we canoed back to their house, and she said, you are learning to swim right now. And she literally just pushed me into the pool, shallow end, don't worry. And she jumped in, and we spent, I would say, 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, just learning how to swim. And then, I mean, once I got it, it was such a feeling of freedom, and just also eliminating that fear of ever drowning, I guess. And it was really the most liberating experience of my whole entire life, even till this day, because I think the sentiment of what it meant to me of being able to be free and to really be free was through just that practice and that exchange. And also when you're in water, and to be able to just float and manipulate your body in any sort of way and do somersaults and all of those things, it just felt so liberating. And I think I've been thinking so much about the theme and the feeling and the sentiment of freedom a lot because of just the challenges that the brand has obviously faced, and how I feel so tied now to recovering and really managing all of these obstacles that I've been faced, and kind of feeling in a position of I just have to fix this, right? But when you're in that position, you don't necessarily feel free because of the commitment that you have to survival mode. And the sentiment of being liberated is a feeling that I haven't felt in a very, very long time. And I think I've been going back to that memory more often within this period for a long time, because I miss that feeling of being free. So that is the most special memory that I have from childhood.
I cannot help myself but kind of connect and see this a little bit as a metaphor because, as you mentioned before, you're seeking that feeling. But as a 10-year-old, you were only able to reach that feeling after you went back and start over and work on it the swimming part of it as well, right? So it seems like it's where you're in path right now. You're going back over, doing the basic, doing what we gotta do, so that freedom will come eventually, and you'll be able to enjoy it, fully embrace it and enjoy the moment as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, definitely. I think this is life. It's
Yeah.
inevitable for us to experience everything that comes with it.
One thing that I think is beautiful about your collection, in some of the things that I read about you doing the research, you have collaborated closely with artisans from places like the Burkina Faso and many other communities as well. I'm curious to know from you, what has been the most profound lesson have you learned from working alongside these communities?
Kindness. When we had the opportunity to go to Burkina Faso, it meant that we had the opportunity to speak to the different artisans. And there's a beautiful spirit within who they are, where they are so happy to exchange the sentiment of grace over to you. And I think it might have a lot to do with the fact that, and I could be wrong, because I don't live in Burkina, I don't live in Kailicha, I don't live in the rural parts of Eastern Cape where these are the regions that we work with the different communities. I don't live in these regions, but I think when you distill life in its purest form and you really look at the true fundamentals of what you need, you remove all of the fluff, all of these unnecessary stuff I think we need. When you're in a position where you have the true fundamentals, you understand that you have a whole life and that's enough. And I think that's why they were able to be who they are, because essentially they have what they fundamentally. I'm so sure that there's so many challenges that they might be facing, but they have their shelter, they have their home, have their water, they have their family, they have their work, they have the fundamental. And within my contemporary landscape, we have that and then some. And then some of the things that we don't necessarily need, but it's things that get imposed onto us or we impose onto ourselves. And we think we want all of these things to curate a life that we obviously envision for ourselves. But the pursuit to acquire those things can come with so much baggage, can come with so much risk, can come with so much pretense, can come with a lot of baggage that you don't necessarily need in your life. So I think just being in the presence of these extraordinary women that I've had the opportunity to work with in these different regions of Africa specifically, the level of grace that they have is unmatched.
Lovely. I want to, before I let you go, I have a couple of rapid fire questions that I hear from you. So let me know when you're
Okay.
ready to go.
So does this mean I have to
All
answer
right.
within
So,
2 seconds?
well, just whatever comes to your mind. There's no super hurry, but I'm curious to see what comes, the first thing to your head. All right.
Okay.
If you could have dinner with any three people from history, who do you choose?
I would choose Toni Morrison. I would choose. Do they have to be from history? Can they be alive?
No, could be currently.
Okay, I would
Yes,
choose.
even
Yeah.
better.
Okay, Toni Morrison, Mariah Carey, maybe Courtney Love as well. Yeah, that would be quite interesting. Oh
If you
my
could
God,
become an
there's so many
expert
more.
on something overnight,
Uh-huh.
what would it be?
To learn and to know every single language in the whole entire world, an expert of languages.
All right. What's the biggest risk you ever took?
Uh, that's easy. Starting this business.
What is the best compliment you ever received?
That I'm kind. It still makes me squirmish a bit. Yeah, kind is the nicest compliment.
What's your favorite way to spend a day off? I mean, I don't believe you have days off because that entrepreneurs don't have days off. But what would be a perfect day off for you?
So between the hours of half past 2 and half past 4, specifically right now during winter time, in my apartment, the sun creeps in so beautifully and it lays into my couch and it's set right there and it creates the most beautiful sense of warmth. And my favorite thing to do is lie on that couch and to go through the different visual coffee table books, all books that I could be reading, and to just have a moment to myself and what I'm essentially engaging with. That is the best time off, and that brings such a beautiful sense of peace to me.
If you were to recommend a book to our viewers, something that you read recently, perhaps a favorite book, which one would be?
There's a book that is actually by Oprah Winfrey, but it's actually an amalgamation of different speakers as well, and it's called A Path Clear. And this book has an amalgamation of different sentiments of the human experience that is extended by many different leaders. And it's very sweet, it's very short, but it's incredibly inspirational. And it's a book that I would recommend to anyone that is forever on the search of purpose.
What about a movie or a TV show that you would recommend?
A movie that every single human being should watch is Shawshank Redemption. It's a movie that is based on hope, and it's a movie that is based on friendship. And I think those are two themes that we can all really take more seriously. I think very underrated. So Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile as well, Tom Hanks.
Oh, both amazing movies. What about a guest? Who should we invite to be here on the show next? Who would you like to hear from?
This might be bias, but I think he is so talented, and I think that he is so underrated. And he's one of my best friends, and he's a fellow fashion designer by the name of Wanda Laporto from Johannesburg, South Africa.
Lovely. Well, we'll get to it. Now, last question. You have the opportunity to go back in time and meet that 5-year-old Lukhanyo. What would you tell him?
I think I would say thank you. I would say thank you for falling in love with a dream that both the 5-year-old him and 32-year-old him feel so deeply for. So I'd say thank you.
And I want to thank you for coming in here today. Open up, share your story, your challenges, your hopes and dreams, and let us to get to know you a little bit more of the person that you are. And cannot wait to see what else is in front of you. And excited to follow your journey from far away. But hopefully we can do this again a couple more times before we're all said and done.
Yes. No, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this.